I didn't intend to update this Karl Barth series so quickly, but I felt there was some good conversation happening, stimulated by the first video, an introduction to Karl Barth to Jordan Peterson fans, and then, the succeeding video about the comment section. And so I thought I'd do an update. I wanted to focus on some kind of declarative sentences that Barth gives in the Epistle to the Romans. And when I first read the book, I was interested in taking note of whenever he declared what something was. So if he said, faith is XYZ, or grace is XYZ, and then I would read those different sections and compare them and think about them. So what I did here is I tried to look for, I wanted to get short quotes. Last time I read quite lengthy quotes, and I also wanted to involve one of the figures from a Jordan Peterson lecture. Like he'll often bring up Dostoevsky or Kierkegaard. And so in this case, I grabbed a part where Dostoevsky was mentioned, and so it'll flesh out something that he says Dostoevsky does in his writing. And what I focused on in this video is 3 quotations about what faith is. So Karl Barth, bit by bit. Here is the quote. I don't have the page numbers for my physical copy. I did all the searches in the Kindle version. So the Kindle location is down below there if you have that. Barth says, faith is the ground, the new order, the light, where boasting ends and the true righteousness of God begins. Faith is not a foundation upon which men can emplace themselves, not an atmosphere in which they can breathe, not a system under which they can arrange their lives. Regarded from our human point of view, what was once religion and law and a method of life becomes anarchy and a void and an abyss. But the law of the faithfulness of God, or what is the same thing, the law of faith, is the place where we are established by God. There is nothing but God himself, God only, and there the place is no place, for it is the moment, quote, moment, when men are moved by God, by the true God, the Creator and Redeemer of men and of all human things, the moment when men surrender themselves and all that they are to God. The, quote, moment of the movement of men by God is beyond men. It cannot be enclosed in a system or a method or a way. It rests in the good pleasure of God, and its occasion is to be sought and found only in him. The law of the Spirit of life is the point of view which is no point of view, by which all human boasting is excluded. I generally don't want to comment on the quotations, because I felt the best way to learn Barth for yourself is to read and listen to what he had to say in his writing. And but I think there are a couple of interesting things I just can't help but comment on. So he focuses on this idea of when he says moment, it's always in quotation marks, the moment. And this is reminding me of what Blake talks about as the real being mental and present. Reality is mental and present, and anything that's historical and past is sort of dead. And so one of the great things about the story of the Bible, you have the establishment of the law, and that's sort of like it covers history, and then you have the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, which is the fulfillment of the law. It's sort of like the embodiment of the law. I think he's going to get into that in the next couple of quotes. I'm not sure. And the way Blake is reading it, and the way some people read it, this risen Christ it's more than an idea, it's more than a metaphor, although the metaphor is powerful, and I'm going to talk more about that in the second part of the Peterson Paradox video series that I'm trying to do. I just don't have too much time, even though it looks like I'm putting out a lot of videos lately. These are videos that don't take a lot of time to put together, whereas the Paradox video requires a lot of reading, a lot of research and putting together of ideas. And one of the ideas is that the idea that the risen Christ as metaphor, as being eternally present, that moment where men give themselves over to God and God is the actor behind that, that is an eternal present. It's where consciousness lies. Your consciousness is not in the past and it's not in the future. It's always in the present, and it's always that moment is always renewed. It's always renewing itself. And Christ is alive. He's living. He's not dead. He's not in the past. He's not in the future. And if you want to get philosophical and do all kinds of abstractions and conceptions, you'll say he's outside of time and all of that. But he's a living being. He's living within us. There's the Holy Spirit aspect. There's a lot of complex and simple and interesting notions going on in the Christian belief system. And this particular word, moment, just got me thinking about what Blake had to say about that and what Northrop Frye says about that. And it just seems to click. And I'm not sure, if Barth ever read anything by Blake. But it certainly seems to fit what Blake had to say, or what Blake had thought about these kinds of things. So the second quote says, if faith be an exercise of human competence, or disposition, or character, it is no more the righteousness of God than is any other human thing. Faith is a vacuum, and a limitation encompassed by miracle and by paradoxical impossibility. But because it is void of human content, it is guaranteed by God as his righteousness. The death of Jesus is thus manifested also in the life of Abraham. And this will be the last quote I read. You're going to see paradox mentioned a lot. Barth seems to be influenced by Kierkegaard, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I know it's up to you to decide if that's good or bad. But and Dostoevsky, like I said, is brought up in this quote. So he begins with this little quote from the Epistle to the Romans that he's commenting on. But to Abraham that worketh not, his faith is reckoned for righteousness. And Barth begins, there is, however, another method of assessing human worth, a method employed, for example, both in the book of Genesis and by Dostoevsky. This method of reckoning is not concerned to give honor where honor is due. It is not busied with proving the righteousness of men. It does not overlook or forget the final question by which the whole procedure is conditioned. It does not think only of wage books, but remembers that there is a book of life in which is recorded the secrets of men which can become known. It is not preoccupied with what may be reckoned to men as of debt, but with that which is of grace. It runs little risk of confusing the judgments of men with the judgments of God, since his judgment forms the basis of the whole method of reckoning. It sees the works of men upon the background of their not working, their lives in the light of their deaths, their mature nobility by the standard of the sovereignty of God. It sees their createdness bearing witness to the Creator, and what is visible in them as void and deprivation, as longing and hope for that which is invisible. It sees human belief in the light of faith. It can calmly and with a certain sad humor rejoice in all human greatness, in all confident belief, in all heroism, in all refinement of soul, and in every human achievement in history. It does not, however, finally judge according to these things, but according to the faith which it perceives, contrary to all appearance, paradox, in all things. And it supposes that in thus judging, it is more just than those far too righteous men who are so busy in assigning praise. It can also, with the same calm and with a certain smile of forgiveness, mourn over all that equally human death and sin, over atheism, heathenism, and degenerate depravity. It does not, however, finally judge according to these things, but according to the faith which it sees, contrary to all appearance, paradox, in all things. And it supposes that, in thus judging, it is more just than those far too righteous men who are so busy in assigning blame. It recognizes that in both cases God's reward is rendered according to His pleasure and His valuation, that He does not respect the persons or masks of men, but judges their secrets. It sees faith because it has believing eyes, and because it knows what faith is, the impossibility from which all possibility emerges, the miracle from which proceeds all human experience, the paradox by which all direct and visible human being and having and doing is limited and rendered questionable, and is established and affirmed. And because it's self-believing, it sees the faith of men beyond all that they are, because it is able to understand what they are from what they are not. It sees their righteousness as reckoned strictly as the righteousness of God, as the divine nevertheless, and not as a divine therefore, as forgiveness, and not as an imprimatur upon what men are. So I thought that was very powerful, a very powerful little section of the Epistle to the Romans, and it's worth thinking about. It's worth considering. It's worth meditating on. It's worth praying on. And if you would like to hear more, and you're not up to reading the whole big book, as it were, just hit the subscribe button, like the video, and I will be putting these up whenever I have time. Thanks again.
Well, there's a guy who's got a little YouTube channel, and I've been sending a lot of people his way, Node in a Network, and he's basically been reading all of the stuff in the footnotes of Maps of Meaning,
where we're all sort of plugged in as like nodes on the network.
Node in a network, there's a good username.
A node in a network.
The wrong model, because you're at the center of a network. You're a node in a network.